Are the Dallas Cowboys seriously considering not giving Dak Prescott a contract extension? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're going to be discussing some of the rumors coming out of the NFL Combine regarding the Dallas Cowboys. We're going to discuss some Tyron Smith news. We're going to discuss a possible trade for Trey Lance. But I want to start with the Dak Prescott conversation because I think you and I this whole time have always believed that Dak is going to get a new deal, probably somewhere around $60 million a year. However, I'm not so sure that's the case now, Landon.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of parse at this point what is just negotiating through the media, but it does feel like that as the kind of weeks have gone on and we get closer and closer to a kind of artificial March 13th deadline, right, where that's kind of the last day that the Cowboys have to kind of pull one of their more appetizing triggers if they decided that they didn't want to extend Dak. And as that time is approached, it does feel like the certainty of a Dak extension has crept a lot closer back down to it being more of a 50-50 proposition, right? And I think, it started with the David Moore article that came out, I think, earlier last week, kind of laying out some of the, David Moore obviously being a mouthpiece for the front office at times, but it also kind of laid out some financial paths that the Cowboys have in order to kind of move some money around if they decided they didn't want to extend Dak. And that included using some void years to push some money forward. But all of this kind of setting up an environment in which there's a possibility that Dak Prescott could be playing the 2024 season without a contract extension. And I think that it kind of, before, when it was more of a binary thing of, either the Cowboys sign Dak Prescott to a new deal or they pay him $60 million in 2024. It felt like obviously that was a no-brainer. But now that there's kind of a middle path that has developed, we start to wonder, and especially with some of the stuff that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, kind of also being kind of rising to the surface, we start to wonder if maybe the Cowboys aren't seriously considering letting Dak kind of play this season out, with no new contract.
Yeah, one of the things that the Cowboys have at least talked about a little bit is the idea of giving Dak basically a big signing bonus this year, converting some of his money into a signing bonus. That would free up, I think, a maximum of $18 million. It would still give him a cap hit of $40.9 million, which would be really high. But you could extend some of that money into the future, take a big cap hit in 2025 when he's not on your team, but also have enough cap space this year to field a very, very competitive team. Now, I know that doesn't sound like the Cowboys would be all in or anything like that, but it would be a good middling option if you wanted to still try to compete this year, but not necessarily tie yourself to Dak for the foreseeable future. It's also, we should mention, let's say that Dak goes out, has an awesome year. The Cowboys get to the championship game, or they get to the Super Bowl and win it. This doesn't preclude you from signing him to a long-term deal next year. It's just that now you are in a little bit of a lame duck year with Dak Prescott.
Well, and beyond that too, it sounds like from what we're hearing is that there is a possibility that the Cowboys could want to re-sign Dak Prescott, but don't actually do it this offseason because of the money flexibility that it would give you in the 2025 season, right? Like to actually wait till the end of this season to sign an extension may actually help your cap situation, regardless of which path you use in the 2025 season. So there is the chance that, that they have the motivation to extend Dak Prescott, but they procedurally decide to wait until the end of the year in order to make the 2025 season not such a cluster of prorated signing bonuses that have to kind of come due all at once. So, there's a lot of angles here for sure. And there's a lot of different, questioning motivations. I think that's the thing that's kind of what we're the most interested in is what's ultimately like the desire here. Is the desire to keep Dak Prescott long-term, or is the desire to give Dak enough, room to kind of either make or break this season and then see if they want to re-sign him at the end of the year? I think that's really the most fascinating aspect about this is this a desire to keep, is the reluctance to go ahead and get through the process of signing a long-term contract accounting move, or is this about wanting to see if make Dak prove it one more time before signing him to another long-term deal?
To me, it's whether the Cowboys want to continue to have an off ramp with Dak Prescott in case things go terribly wrong. Like, let's say Dak regresses and plays poorly in 2024, or maybe Dak plays well and the team performs really poorly and they go 7-10 and they miss the playoffs. And it's just clear that they've reached the highest point that they're going to get with this current roster. And now it's time to reset and rebuild. To me, I think that the poster child of doing this would be like what the Seahawks did with Russell Wilson back in 2021 that they 2022, right? Like you were competitive for the last 5 or 6 years in the post Legion of Boom era. It's clear that Wilson's still a good quarterback, but we need to move on just to kind of reset the franchise. That's what you would be looking at here with Dak. Now we can talk about whether the Seahawks have had successful seasons after that, but it is an option that at least I think the Cowboys are open to exploring should the contract negotiations not go well.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic to bring that up today of all days when the Broncos just released Russell Wilson 2 years after, trading him for an enormous amount. So, yeah, I think it's not a very easy picture to kind of decipher. There's a lot of different angles, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about like at what point do the Cowboys feel like they've seen enough here, and they feel like it's time for them to kind of try something new and move on to like the next kind of generation of what this is going to be.
Just to be clear, I still think the most likely outcome here is a Dak Prescott extension. We actually heard Dak talk yesterday about the extension that he's not really worried about. He said he's confident it's going to get done. I think some of this is just posturing by the Cowboys. They know they don't have a lot of leverage, but this is basically the only thing they have. But it's not even a lot of leverage for Dak because Dak could just hit free agency next year when there would be a lot of teams open to signing him. But it does give the Cowboys a potential out if they want to go in a different direction. I just don't know the likelihood that they'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, even the middle path option that we talked about using the void money stuff, it requires Todd France and Dak to agree to want to do that. But I have no reason to believe that they wouldn't agree to do that because it's not like
free money right now.
Yeah, free money. And on top of that, it's not like Dak is necessarily afraid to become a free agent. I'm assuming he's going to make huge money on whatever free agent market he potentially gets onto. So there are options here. I think it's really what's interesting to me is more about what their motivation is, what their plan is, more than whatever roster machination they end up using for the 2024 season.
And one move that might be tied into the Dak Prescott contract extension is whether or not they bring back Tyron Smith, which seems like it's in doubt now. Let's get to that news next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? How about read a book? A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, How would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can go and do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Lana, let's talk about the Tyron Smith news. So what we heard on Saturday from Ian Rappaport that the Cowboys and Tyron Smith are unexpected or not expected to come to a deal, making Tyron Smith a free agent for the first time in his career. First of all, what was your initial reaction to that news?
Oh man, not great. I mean, I was certainly upset. Just because I love Tyron. I've always been a huge Tyron Smith fan, and so I don't love the idea of him playing elsewhere. I don't love the idea of him not playing for the Cowboys. Period.
No,
So
neither do I.
just on an emotional reaction level, it wasn't great. I wasn't happy. I think kind of just again analyzing what's going on here. Obviously the Cowboys coach brass met with Tyron and his agent at training camp. They probably discussed some numbers. I think it's reasonable to think that the Tyron Smith camp, got whiff of and word of exactly the kind of money that Tyron could potentially be making on a free agent, in a free agent
I
situation.
think that's definitely what happened. And the Cowboys were just so far off that it wasn't competitive at all.
Exactly. And I think that they had a conversation with the Cowboys, and the Cowboys got saucer-eyed when they heard the numbers that were being bantied around, especially considering the number that Tyron Smith played on last year and frankly has played on the last few years. I mean, I think just to kind of back up, I have said for years that 10-year deal or whatever it was that Tyron signed is maybe the greatest contract in the history of sports for the Cowboys.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so I think at this point it's probably time for that bill to come due. And the Cowboys were shocked by the sticker price. And I the reason I do think that this is very tied to the Dak situation is that, I tend to think that if the Cowboys were certain that they could bring back Dak Prescott, they may have more likelihood to try to re-sign Tyron. I just think that they might give them some flexibility to kind of move that money around. But if they're planning on, if they understand that this is kind of an all-in year, they may have had a number in mind for Tyron, right? Like, and they may have had, okay, look, we're going to eat a lot of Dak contract this year. So we can portion, I'm just going to throw out a number like $12-13 million for or I guess no, like $18 million for Tyron Smith. And then, this and this and that. And then when they went to go talk to Tyron, the number was probably $25 million, sure. $26 million guaranteed, or with like 18 guaranteed or something ridiculous, right? So the Cowboys just decided they just simply cannot afford that if they are trying to think about kind of continuing to have this Dak off ramp, right? Because it's expensive to have the Dak off ramp if that's what you want, right? And so it became a difficult situation. I'm sure that look, I don't think the situation is over, right? Like I don't think it's clearly not a done deal. Tyron's not signed with anyone yet. I think there's still a chance that he goes out in free agency and sees what the number is, and then the Cowboys come back and maybe they work a deal. I'm not betting on it. I'm not counting on it, but I wouldn't necessarily say that this situation is completely done yet. But I do think that it's fascinating to see this all play out, kind of next to a Dak contract negotiation, because yeah, I think that these kind of situations are playing against each other a little bit, because even though you want both Tyron and Dak back in a situation where you're kind of going all in, you may not have all the options that you want available to you if you commit all that money to both Dak and Tyron, especially with Tyron. There's always the chance that the wheels fall off.
Well, and
And
that
if you
was going to
sign a
be my
long-term
point.
deal, yeah,
That's why I don't necessarily think they're tied together, because I do wonder if the Cowboys feel like they caught lightning in a bottle a little bit last year with him staying healthy. And even in that stretch, like there were games where he missed or left early, and you just wonder, like, how long before. I mean, he's always
yeah,
talked about playing until the wheels fall off. Like that could happen at any point now.
yeah,
My guess is here's what happened, Landon. The Cowboys were interested in doing a similar deal to Tyron with what they did last year, where we're going to pay you game by game, and
hmm
we'll even give you a little bit more raise. Let's say it's $1.5 million per game this year, right? But my guess is that there's a team or two out there that's willing to pay Tyron just a guaranteed deal, 1 year, $20 million, with $16 million guaranteed, not depending on play time. And that's probably
yeah,
just more interesting to Tyron, right? Like, because I think Tyron probably felt like last year he was going to try to tough it out through any injury, because it was $1 million every game that he played, right? Where if he goes to another team and gets $16 million guaranteed, but he needs to take 3 weeks off because he hurt his ankle, he's probably more willing to do that. And I just think that probably is factored into this decision. Here's the other thing that by the way, I agree with you. Like, it's going to suck to see Tyron play on a different team, just like it sucked to watch DeMarcus Lawrence or DeMarcus Ware play on a
yeah.
different team. I'm going to feel the exact same way. I wonder if the Cowboys looked at Tyron last year and felt like amazing pass blocker, but he really
Mhm.
regressed as a run blocker.
He
And
really
if they're
did.
going to try to change the offense a little bit to become a little bit more balanced, and they want to be a little bit more physical, I wonder if they felt like, hey, maybe this is the time, let Tyron go, draft a left tackle, or move Tyler Smith over to left tackle, and let's try to be a little bit more dominant in the run game. Because as great as Tyron is, that he wasn't that player in the run game last year.
Here's the harshest truth here is that there's no good year for Tyron to leave. Like we don't
No,
we
there's
don't
not.
want
It's not.
we're Cowboys fans. Like we don't want to see Tyron go. Period.
No.
Like there's not like a happy, a situation in which Tyron is walking away. I want to see Tyron play for the Cowboys for the rest of
As I
his
say,
life.
even if Tyron Smith wins
Like,
the Super Bowl, even if the Cowboys win the Super Bowl and Tyron Smith retires after the Super Bowl, we're going to be bummed, because it means that
yeah,
we don't get to
yeah,
see Tyron play anymore.
yeah. So let's keep that in mind,
Yeah.
right? Now keeping that separate, there could not be a better season to replace Tyron Smith. There just couldn't be.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is, look, I mean, the timing of everything with Dak and the all in and all that's let's put that over there. Look at the draft class that is being provided for you.
Yeah.
And on top of the fact that you also have Tyler Smith, which makes the draft class even more palatable, because Tyler has shown you that he can play left guard and left tackle equally excellent. Maybe he showed you a little bit more in guard, but I think you put him out there full time at left tackle, he's going to be fantastic at it.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you the option to dip into this draft class at both the interior or offensive tackle spot, both of which are incredibly deep, both of which have really great players in it. I just feel like it's upsetting, and we don't want to talk about it. But as far as a team building, logical sense, this is probably the best year for the Cowboys to try and replace Tyron.
No, it sucks, but it's true, right?
And that's the difficult part, right?
They're also already paying a lot of money for this offensive line. Like Zach Martin just got a contract extension last year to make him the highest paid guard in the NFL.
He's the second highest paid player on the team right now, if I'm not mistaken.
I know.
That's something to keep in mind,
Karen Steele just got a deal, right? Tyler Smith is on a first-round rookie contract, which is still relatively cheap.
Still pricey.
I just don't know if they feel like they can pay $20 million for a left tackle who at any week could be lost for the season. And that's really unfortunate. And I hate the way that this is going to end, but it might be just a situation where both sides are right, and a divorce probably makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, I listen. I mean, I know people want to blame the Cowboys front office for not playing this correctly, but honestly, this may be the best way to play this. Unless you have a left tackle already in hand, which that's an unrealistic expectation.
No.
Like there aren't enough good offensive linemen to fill out starting rosters. To think that you would have a waiting in the wings starting left tackle is
The-
pretty unrealistic. In some ways, and the fact that the Cowboys kind of do playing left guard is pretty shocking.
Yeah. The bummer of this all is you just wish Tyron could retire as a Cowboy or play his last game as a Cowboy. And that's the funny thing. Like if Tyron would have announced this offseason that he was retiring, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Like we would have been bummed, but nobody would have been mad at the front office that they don't have a left tackle replacement on the roster. But because Tyron wants to continue to play, it makes things a little bit more challenging. That wasn't the only rumor that we got coming out of the combine. We got one about a backup quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, which is a little bit of shock. Let's discuss that one next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing some rumors coming out of Indianapolis. And this one to me is the most shocking of them all. We got a report from Rich Eisen, who works for the NFL Network, of course, basically say that Trey Lance could be an option for the Minnesota Vikings if they lose Kirk Cousins in free agency. The asking price would be a third-round pick, which is interesting because the Vikings don't have a third-round pick. But what do you make of this rumor that the Vikings could potentially try to go out and get Trey Lance?
I didn't even catch that part. They don't even have a third round pick. I think it's fascinating because and not even so much because of the thing itself, but more just like it's fascinating to me that we're hearing rumors about the Cowboys not potentially extending Dak Prescott, but we're also hearing a rumor that the Cowboys are willing to trade Trey Lance, which those two things don't seem very compatible necessarily, right? Like you definitely would like to have Trey Lance on this roster if Dak Prescott is playing the 24 season without a contract and without a guarantee of a contract, right? So it's fascinating. I mean, I think it's funny because you also heard separately, maybe it's from Jerry, right? They asked about Trey Lance in his bus interview, and he talked about how the arrow is pointing up, and that he's looking really good. And I don't know if that's Jerry exclusively trying to grease the wheels for a potential Trey Lance trade, and then this rumor from Rich Eisen is kind of just the final sales pitch or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it is fascinating, right? Like and I guess the first thing that I thought of was that why would any team trade for Trey Lance more than what the Cowboys traded for him? What do they think has happened
with
this
with less years remaining on the deal? Like that part of it doesn't make any sense.
The Cowboys didn't even have Trey Lance in training camp, right?
No.
This all happened like right before the season started.
Yeah,
right?
because Trey Lance played the preseason with the 49ers.
So, what do they think happened to Trey Lance in the period of the last 7 months that has made him a whole round more valuable, especially a whole round more valuable in a pick that the Vikings are going to have to go out and find a third round pick in order to trade to the Cowboys. So I think it's, to me, let's be clear, 100% don't believe it. It's a silly rumor, but it's fascinating. I think the reason that I wanted to talk about it is because to me it's fascinating that this is a rumor that's coming up around the same time that supposedly the Cowboys are potentially thinking about playing a little bit of hardball with Dak's contract, which again kind of to me points to the fact that they're not really going to be playing that much hardball with
No.
the Dak's contract.
No.
Like you would not that I believe the Trey Lance rumors, but even the fact that someone will be putting a Trey Lance rumor out there while negotiating, pretending like they're playing hardball with Dak Prescott, it kind of belies its own rumor. So. Yeah, I don't think that the Cowboys are going to likely get a 3rd round pick for Trey Lance.
No.
I listen. I do think that if the Cowboys extend Dak, and I wouldn't be shocked. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if they did flip Trey Lance. I don't know if they could get a 3rd round pick for him, but if someone offered it, I mean, I would definitely take it.
So Minnesota 4th round, their pick is 109. After the expected compensatory picks, like, okay, I could potentially see that pick. The reason why is, so we've got 4 quarterbacks that are going to go in the 1st round for sure. Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy. I think it's pretty likely 3 quarterbacks go right in a row to Washington, to Chicago, Washington, New England. And let's say Atlanta signs Kirk Cousins and it's the Broncos that come up and get, let's say it's the Giants, because that was the other report that Rich Eisen had, is that they were done with Daniel Jones.
That was terrible news. The terrible news. They should keep going with Danny Dimes. Yeah.
There are several teams out there that are just going to be left with nothing at quarterback. Yeah. Minnesota, because I don't know if you've heard the rumors, but there's some substantial rumors that Kirk Cousins is going to Atlanta. Yeah. Minnesota doesn't have a quarterback. The Broncos just cut Russell Wilson. The Raiders have been trying like crazy to trade up into the top 5. Yep. All they have is Aiden O'Connell on their roster. I mean, you even have quarterbacks like the Saints, the Seahawks, the Rams who are looking at quarterbacks. One of these teams is going to get stuck. And if Baker Mayfield resigns in Tampa Bay and Justin Fields goes to Pittsburgh, what do the Vikings or the Raiders do? Maybe they do explore a Trey Lance trade and just say, hey, it's a 4th round pick. We trade him. Let's give them a look-see, and then we'll move on next year if it doesn't work out. A 3rd round pick seems rich.
Look. Yeah, I mean, that for sure, right? And maybe you can lie to yourself and say, hey, we're going to get a nice compensatory pick. If you're the Vikings, maybe we're going to get a nice compensatory pick for whatever the deal is with Kirk, and maybe that's the way you kind of can sell it to yourself. But I do think that the interesting X's and O's aspect of it is I do think that Trey Lance with Kevin O'Connell is a fascinating combination to me, because if you look at what he was able to do with Josh Dobbs on no practice, and I think you look at Trey Lance's skill set and they're not dissimilar, right? Like in the sense that Lance can win with legs when you need him to, but he's also got a big arm. So if you can kind of harness his quarterbacking a little bit, you can cobble together a really good game based on the Kevin O'Connell offense that would kind of fit his skill set. But yeah, I tend to think that a 3rd round pick is extremely rich. And again, like it doesn't even make sense if the Cowboys, it's only around more than what the Cowboys spent to get him. And it doesn't really make sense to trade him less than a year after you got him, in a year in which your starting quarterback contract is in kind of peril. That it's just none of that lines up at all.
I think you only trade Trey Lance if you get Dak's contract done. But I will say, like, let's use the Minnesota example in terms of like where they're drafting 409. The pick that the Cowboys spent for Trey Lance is 125. You could talk yourself into, hey, we got Trey Lance as a backup quarterback for a year, and we just moved up 20 spots in the draft. Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a loss, No. So yeah, it's okay. It's kind of more like you paid like $5 million or whatever Trey Lance's contract was last year to move up 20 spots in like this year's draft. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
I will say there's probably going to be 3 teams in the NFL this year that don't get a quarterback in round 1 of the draft, and they miss out on the Kirk Cousins and the Baker Mayfields in free agency. Those 3 teams are going to have to scramble, whether it's starting Aiden O'Connell, like a day 3 pick from last year, whether it's talking yourself into Russell Wilson or Sam Darnold or Andy Dalton. Spoiler, none of your fan bases are going to like that. I can actually see fan bases being more excited about the potential of a Trey Lance working out for a day 3 pick than, well, here's Joe Flacco again at 38 years old, or here's Andy Dalton to come in and save it. maybe
How
that's
quick?
why something.
How quick can Spencer Rattler learn the playbook before
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
season starts? Yeah,
But
no,
even then,
I
like
think you're right.
some of these teams are going to want to cover themselves before they get into the draft, right?
I don't look in the same sense that we are viewing Trey Lance as a potential like bridge quarterback if things don't work out with Dak Prescott. I could he's so much younger than all the quarterbacks in this class, like you said, or at least
Yeah,
as the
day
same
younger
older.
than Michael Penix.
So I mean, he's still got youth. He still has upside. He has all the athletic talent in the world. He's got everything correct between the ears that you like. He's got a good work ethic. There's still lots of reasons to be excited and see the arrow is pointing up for Trey Lance. And I think that there's a solid reason why he would be one of these guys who's the all right. We didn't get what we wanted the QB carousel, but this guy could be an option, a low
Yes.
cost option to kind of get us where we need with the potential upside of hey, maybe he hits and he's our quarterback. And I think that you could really easily talk yourself into something like that.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.